looking for that great next read or your new favorite author? Check out Amy's Bookshelf Reviews recommendations. You won't be disappointed. Welcome to Amy's Bookshelf Reviews podcast. It is a spin-off of the website and book review site of Amy's Bookshelf Reviews. Amy's Bookshelf Reviews podcast is about book reviews, a writer's muse, a book's peruse, author interviews, and literary news. Welcome to the new year, where new things may happen with this. I hope you all enjoy, and thank you for listening. Good evening, and hello, listeners. This is Amy from Amy's Bookshelf Reviews podcast, and March is Women's History Month. And I was thinking about who do I know that, or who do I get inspired by when it comes to, a female author, just a person in general, some kind of, national icon, whatever you would call it. I don't want to just say celebrity because it's really, I think what happens is, and this is my opinion, that sometimes we're so busy looking at our present that we forget about the past and the past before our own past. And if you think about even in just your generational families, maybe you have a cultural family, where you have traditions and you have, besides family in common, you have community, you're a part of something. And I think that even outside of that, if you are part of some type of community, whether it is nowadays, it can be virtual or it could be reality in real life, or it could be both. I must say that out of the various communities that I'm a part of, it is the author community that I get the most support from. And I really, I take that to heart. I think it's very important to be part of a community where you are supporting each other, lifting each other up, and not knocking them down. One thing I've learned too, that by my sharing my own personal limitations, my health, my physical being, and how I am always trying to be transparent about it, because I want people to understand that I am still doing the work that I love to do. And only when I can't move my hands anymore, or I can't remember anything anymore, will I stop being part of a community. And I like that I'm able to have this type of podcast, this voice. I think the person who talked me out of letting it go. And then I recreated this new format, and I am really, it's small, but I am building up, hopefully an audience. An author brings their audience, and then maybe more and more people will listen, because I want this to be not just about authors or publishers or publicists or agents, but also readers or those who want to write and, and want to know that they're not alone. And if you write, you're a writer. if you're published, you're an author. But if you write, even if you write and never publish it, you're still a writer. Um, and in that, I was thinking about, which authors inspire me, you know, from the past, classic authors or authors that maybe in the last century wrote. Um, and there were three that just kind of popped off my bookshelf. And then, so I want to share a couple excerpts from some books from some of my favorite. My Actually, they inspire me. I don't think I could ever pick. Oh, this one is my absolute favorite. Um, I can do that with a book series because then the next one will become my favorite. But when it comes to authors and their work, um, everybody's writing style is unique to themselves. Their storytelling style is unique to them. Their stories, hopefully, are unique to them. So, why don't you sit back, pour yourself a cup of coffee? That's what I'm drinking. It's not wine time yet, but it will be soon. Anyways, so I first wanted to read um, an excerpt from Laura Ingalls Wilder. If you ever heard of the television show started in 1974, Little House on the Prairie, um, that show was based loosely off of the children's books of Laura Ingalls Wilder, which she never, she, at late in life, she decided, with the, insistence of her daughter, that she should share her childhood stories. And so she wrote them and she got them published, and she also uh, she continued to educate herself, and she had a great support from her husband. Um, and uh, this book is called West from Home, and it's actually these were letters found, um, and they were written in 1915, and their exchanges. It starts out between Laura and her daughter Rose, and then it Laura writes her stories, or her what's been going on. Laura's taking a trip to San Francisco, um, to to see her daughter and spend a month with her daughter. That's the plan. And so Laura, along the way, she would write letters, and at the train stops, or wherever she had to stop, she would mail them to her husband, excuse me. So, just so you know, Laura calls Almanzo Manley, and he calls her Bessie. I know on the television show he called her Beth, but Bessie was something different. This is what he actually called her. Um, so I'm just going to read one of the letters that she wrote. It said, Kansas City, Sunday, August 22nd, 1915. Manly dear, I just did make my train. Train from Springfield was 2 hours late, loaded with people trying to get to St. Louis from the south and having to come around by Kansas City. There were 15 coaches and 2 engines on the train. I sat all the way with a St. Louis German who smelled of beer and said V instead of W, but he was very kind and treated me to peaches. And in the night it got cold, and he woke me up, laying his extra coat very softly over me. He was an old gray-headed man, gray-headed and a perfect gentleman. I'm going to find everyone kind and all the help I need as usual. I hope you and Inky are all right. And just a note, Inky happens to be their cat. And I'm going to read one more letter. Uh, Manly dear, write me so I know how everything is when I get there. Do you remember the address, Mrs. Gillette Lane, care of the Bulletin, San Francisco, California? We should be in Denver, but we are 198 miles away, 4 hours and 15 minutes late, but trying our best to make up the time. There was a washout last night, 400 feet long and 40 feet wide. While I slept soundly on the safe side, someone must have worked like mischief fixing it so we could cross over. It is a queer looking country, great hills of sand with the grass so thin over it that shows through, sand cliffs along the river, and clumps of willows and cottonwoods along the river, but not a tree anywhere else, just the sand hills rolling across in every direction. It must be the ranch country, big ranch country. Every once in a while, there will be a house and a barn and a windmill with corrals near, sorry. I can see bunches of horses and cattle farther away and bunches of calves nearer the barns. I counted 50 little calves in one bunch. There and there have been larger ones. All yesterday there was only one other woman in the car, and she had her berth made up and stayed in it. There were three men. I asked one of them if he knew just where we were, so we got to talking. He is a full-blooded Frenchman, and his home is in Baltimore, Maryland. Saw my first sagebrush this morning, a dwarf variety. It is in little clumps all over the prairie. I just saw so many cattle. Must have been 200 in a big pasture. The range is fenced up, you know. The land is so flat. This lawyer from Nebraska says it's beautiful, and the old Frenchman and I smile at each other. He thinks it looks like great country, but not pretty. I don't like the lawyer chap, even if he is a graduate of Harvard, as he says. He talks too much with his mouth and takes much for granted. Sat down in a seat with me without being asked. I've frozen him out, and the Frenchman shook him and is talking with a nice boy about the trip of Denver, out of Denver. The Frenchman is on his way to San Francisco, but stops over at Denver while I go on. He was in Belgium and just before the war and saw the Cathedral of the Rhimes and the one the Germans destroyed, and that famous stained rose window that can never be replaced. He is about 75 years old and has told me of his wife, who is a New Orleans French woman, and his mother, who made several trips from New Orleans to Europe in sailing vessels when she was a girl. The hills have rock tops now and are awfully funny looking. I was interrupted here by a man who was a cowboy in Nebraska when he was young, but is now a lawyer. He is on his way to Snake River Valley in Wyoming, where he has a ranch. The country is growing smooth again. We are past the funny hills. We are in Colorado now. There is a homestead land here, and rights can be bought, where it is already taken from $350 to $500 for 320 acres. The homesteads here are 320 instead of 160, a new law. It is a dry farming or irrigation as one prefers. A lake of underground water furnishes irrigation if pumped. The country is flat, and I can see as far as my eyes will let me. We will be in Denver about noon, and I am told I can get a train out at 3 o'clock. I have already missed the train I expected to take. Turn my watch back an hour, Western time now. So that is from, again, that was West from Home, letters between Laura Ingalls Wilder and her husband, Almanzo Wilder, as she makes a trip to her daughters and her daughter's husband. So Rose is her daughter, and so she was Rose Wilder Lane. That is, she is also a writer and an author, and she actually wrote several books um, discussing her mother and her father. Um, another book I just wanted to read a little bit of one of Helen Keller. She was born with sight and hearing, but she got sick and she became blind and deaf. Unfortunately, words that she knew, she could no longer speak. Um, so I am going to read a little bit of um, her book called the Story of My Life. And I remember reading a book about Helen Keller. And I remember it had to be, I want to say, third or fourth grade. And I can just, picture it was like a great book cover. And, um, and when, and in that book, it taught you, the, uh, Braille, alphabet. Um, I don't have that book anymore. And the only thing that I know is what uh, the dot for A is. One dot. That's the only thing I remember. I mean, you see them on, you see Braille, of course, in elevators and certain places, but you would think that you would actually see more of that. Well, I mean, people who actually can see, so that people who don't see would be able to access more things or be able to know where they're going. Anyway, so I'm going to read part of chapter 2, and this is written from Helen Keller, her own words. I cannot recall what happened during the first months after my illness. I only know that I sat in mother's lap or clung to her dress as she went about her household duties. My hands felt every object, observed every motion, and in this way I learned to know many things. Soon I felt the need of some kind of communication um, with others and began to make crude signs. A shake of the head meant no, a nod, yes, a pull meant come, a push meant go. Was it bread that I wanted? Then I would imitate the acts of cutting the slices and buttering them. If I wanted my mother to make ice cream for dinner, I made the sign for working the freezer and shivered, indicating cold. My mother, moreover, succeeded in making me understand a good deal. I always knew when she wished me to bring her something, and I would run upstairs or anywhere else she indicated. Indeed, I owe her loving wisdom all that was bright and good in my long night. I understood a good deal of what was going on around me. At 5, I learned to fold and put away the clean clothes when they were brought in from the laundry, and I distinguished my own from the rest. I knew by the way my mother and aunt dressed when they were going out, and I invariably begged to go out with them. I was always sent for when there was company and when guests took their leave. I waved my hand to them, I think, with a vague remembrance of the meaning of the gesture. One day, some gentleman called on my mother, and I felt a shutting of the front door and other sounds that indicated their arrival. On a sudden thought, I ran upstairs before anyone could stop me to put on my idea of a company dress. Standing in the mirror, as I had seen others do, I anointed mine head with oil and covered my face thickly with powder. Then I pinned a veil over my head so that it covered my face, fell in folds down to my shoulders, and tied an enormous bustle around my small waist so that it dangled behind, almost meeting the hem of my skirt. Thus attired, I went down to entertain the company. I do not remember when I first realized that I was different from other people, but I knew it before my teacher came to me. I had noticed that my mother and my friends did not use signs as I did when they wanted something done, but talked with their mouths. Sometimes I stood between two persons who were conversing and touched their lips. I could not understand and was vexed. I moved my lips and gesticulated frantically without the result. This made me so angry at times that I kicked and screamed until I was exhausted. I think I knew when I was naughty, for I knew that it hurt Ella, my nurse, to kick her. And when my fit of temper was over, I had a feeling akin to regret. but I cannot remember any instance in which its feeling prevented me from repeating the naughtiness when I failed to get what I wanted. In those days, a little colored girl, Martha Washington, the child of our cook, and Belle, an old setter and a great hunter in her day, were my constant companion. Martha Washington understood my signs, and I seldom had any difficulty in making her do what I wished. It pleased me to domineer over her, and she generally submitted to my tyranny rather than risk a hand-to-hand encounter. I was strong, active, indifferent to consequences. I knew my own mind well enough, and always had my own way, even if I had to fight tooth and nail for it. We spent a great deal of time in the kitchen, kneading dough balls, help making ice cream, grinding coffee, quarreling over the cake bowl, and feeding the hens and turkeys that swarmed about the kitchen steps. Many of them were so tame that they would eat from my hand and let me feel them. One big gobbler snatched a tomato from me one day and ran away with it. Inspired, perhaps, by Master Gobbler's success, we carried off to the wood pile a cake which the cook had just frosted and ate every bit of it. I was quite ill afterwards, and I wondered if retribution also overtook the turkey. The guinea fowl likes to hide her nest in out-of-way places, and it was one of my greatest delights to hunt for eggs in the long grass. I could not tell Martha Washington what I when I wanted to go egg hunting, but I would double my hands and put them on the ground, which meant something round in the ground, and Martha always understood. When we were fortunate to find a nest, I never allowed her to carry the eggs home, making her understand by empathetic signs that she might fall and break them. And the chapter will continue. Again, that was Helen Keller, The Story of My Life. When I was trying to figure out exactly how to celebrate, cherish Women's History Month, and to me, history is history, whether it's his story or her story or whoever's story. They have a past, a present, hopefully a future. You know, you're created, hopefully you're born, you grow up, you pass away. Sometimes it doesn't happen in that order. And sometimes there's things in the middle that don't happen. But it is the life we know and the life that has always been. Um, but I think that knowing history, realizing the how far we've come and yet how far we have stepped backwards. And some places we've almost stood still. And you would think that in someone's lifetime, there would be change, something better. Not as good as it used to be, but better than it used to be. You know, we as humans should strive to better ourselves, should be lifelong learners, should have purpose in our life, no matter your age or your disability. If you have a purpose, you have something. If you have more than one purpose, more than one mission, then that's something. If your purpose or mission also lends to inspiring others, that just adds to it. And it's not an ego thing, it is a type of something that is ingrained into you. I have this innate thing I can't explain because it was part of me before I was born to help others. My mother, who I miss very, very much, she didn't realize how special she was how beautiful she was inside and out, and how talented and smart she was. She just didn't realize it. She couldn't look in the mirror and see the goodness looking back at her. She didn't think she was good enough. But she passed away in 1997. She was 44. And she taught me a lot of life lessons, and not by sitting me down and saying, Amy, you got to do this, this, and this. No, not like that. Just by her being who she was as a person, she taught me everything. I mean, there are some things, she taught me how to cook, she taught me how to improvise. You know, we had conversations, we talked about, uh, I learned to like her music, she learned to tolerate mine. But, you know, uh, I don't think she appreciated it when I wanted to go out dressed like Madonna, but it was the 80s. So sorry, mom. You know, okay. Anyway, so then I was thinking about myself um and my family. I have three sisters, a brother. My father uh has uh progressive dementia. Um, my best friend was my grandmother who died in 2022. She was 101, and I miss her every day. And she inspired me because she was one of the strongest person I know. And then I was talking to my sons. I guess as I've gotten older, I do not edit myself quite well, but it's in front of my family, so whatever. They know me. And then I was kind of really proud because my other grandmother, she died 2009, and she was 89 years old, and she had the worst childhood that you could imagine, aside from my mother's childhood. It was just from terrible. But my grandma, she didn't focus on that. She endured. She pushed through. She was a crippled child. She was born with one leg shorter than the other. So in those times, in the 1920s, um, well, at least her parents looked at her as broken. Uh, and after several abuse allegations and neglect, my grandmother was put into an orphanage. And yes, back then they were called orphanages, or they were like convents. So, and she grew up and she worked her butt off, and she had foster families that only used her for what she could do for them, such as hard labor on a farm, but she did it. You know, only people that know my grandmother or know her that well would know that story or would know her story. But it's the same thing. It's my family and past. Um, and it reminds me that you don't have to be famous to have a legacy. You don't have to be a loudmouth for people to hear your voice. In this day and age, I find it is more uncommon to be kind and to get kindness in return than it is to be negative. To me, it's very hard to be mean to someone. I can do it, sure. And but doesn't make you feel good. I've gotten frustrated and angry, doesn't make you feel any better. And I don't like feeling that because it just, negative emotions just kind of eat you up inside. And I'm not as good as I used to be being able to take different emotions and putting them on a shelf. Um, in some ways, I've been through my life, I've been kind of in a way an empath, and because I could feel other people's emotions because I was able to put mine aside and do what was needed to be done. And it was usually just people that I was close to, not in, like proximity wise, but just like something that, one of those feelings that you just can't get past. And some people think, oh, that's just weird. Well, so am I. I'm very weird, so I don't care. Now, I was going to read a couple other things, but um, I was going to read a chapter from my short story book called The Forsaken. Um, I'm not going to do that. However, I do have several signed copies on hand. So if you would like a free signed copy of The Forsaken by Amy Shannon, you can email me at Amy's Bookshelf, blah, blah. Amy's Bookshelf Reviews at gmail.com. And in the subject, write The Forsaken, and just send me your mailing address, which I will keep confidential. And I would love to send you a copy of my book. This story actually inspired me to create my historical nonfiction book of my hometown. But there's something that I was, like, my mother was a writer, and she wrote in diaries, and her diaries are what happened that day. So uh, I have a couple of them, and sometimes I like to go back and read them because they're like from when I was a kid. And I'm like, oh, I forgot all about that. Or, oh, yeah, I remember what being around did for that. Um, but um, I was thinking about, finding excerpts from something that my mom wrote. And I have uh, notebooks, but not all of them. She would write one story and it kept going on and on and on. And it only stopped when she stopped writing. And there were a lot of notebooks. I have some of them, but I don't have all of them, and they're not in order. Otherwise, I would have, maybe someday I'll read them and then, you know, um, figure out something maybe I want to share with people, maybe not. I'm not sure. But then as I was looking through the stuff I have, I found a letter that I have a couple letters that she actually wrote me. Um, but this one I just picked it up and I'm like, okay, I am just gonna read a letter my mom wrote to me. Dear Amy, hi there, I got your letter yesterday, so I thought I would answer it today. It's 2:19 a.m. Sunday morning. I'm waiting for Alicia, that's my sister, to come home. I get nervous when she's out that late. She calls me sometimes, but other times she doesn't call when she's going to be late. Your father is in bed, but he just got up to go potty. Yes, and my mother actually talked like that. Speaking of potty, how is Darius doing with his toilet training? My oldest son Darius was about 2 years old. Let's see, about 3 years old, excuse me. I hope for your sake he's doing well. I know how hard it is to potty break a kid. I hope that your cold is better. I know how hard it is having a cold and have to chase a 2.5-year-old kid around the house. How do you like my stationery? It's the stationery you bought for me in Maine. I forgot that I had it. It was on my desk and I didn't know it was there. Adria found it when she was looking for a letter. She never found the letter, but she found this paper. Adria told me that Andrew walked to Schenectady on Friday with a friend. I haven't heard anything from him. He's a confused kid and doesn't know what he wants to do with his life. Last week, he got picked up by the Saratoga cops for lifting some cigarettes. I don't know what to do with that kid. My brother is now a successful family man, father of many, and grandfather. I'm watching the Apollo Comedy Hour. It's a really stupid show, but I need some noise in the house. It keeps me occupied. It's 15 minutes before 3, and Alicia still isn't home. I know she's all right, or I would have heard from someone. She'll come home when she's ready. Sometimes she falls asleep at the house where she went and loses track of time. At least she told my mom. How's Darius doing? He's such a big boy. He's a good boy. I love that kid. He sure is a funny little fellow. He says and does the funniest things. Rain Man is going to be on later tonight. I'm going to watch it. I wouldn't miss it. Well, our car is on the last legs. The man at Casio said it will eventually have to get something fixed that could cost a lot of money. So I guess your dad is going to take the car off the road. I don't want him to do that, but we have to. I don't know if he wants to sell the car or what he's going to do with that hunk of junk. I don't know when we'll get another car. I hope we can get one soon. I don't want to go without a car. Right now, Spot is running around the house. He's a funny little kitty. He reminds me of Prince, and he's the same color. Well, Alicia just got home, so I will close for now. Love, Mom. And that's the kind of stuff that my mom wrote to me. We wrote about, these are handwritten letters. And I still think that a handwritten letter is, or sending a letter through the mail, because I have terrible handwriting now. It's a lost art form, like sending Christmas cards or, mailing letters instead of email. Things may be quicker, but sometimes having something you can hold in your hand that has your like that's my mom's handwriting. So my mom was the first woman to inspire me. And to me, she left a great legacy. And so did my grandmothers and the ones that came after and the ones that came before. All of your families, your generations. Celebrate your history, not just because you're women, not just because you could be famous, but just because you're human. And we all need to keep our humanity, or it'll just fade away. This has been Amy Shannon from Amy's Bookshelf Reviews. If you are an author and you want to be on the show, or you have a book you want to be on the show, you can go to my website at amysbookshelfreviews.com/podcast for more information. Have a good night. Be safe and be well. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Amy's Bookshelf Reviews. If you are looking to be on the podcast or looking for a book review, you can go to amysbookshelfreviews.com and look for the appropriate navigational menu. Again, thank you all for listening and being a supporter of this podcast and of the Amy's Bookshelf Reviews professional reviewers of books and audiobooks. Thank you all. Be safe and be well. Unlawful Identity by Amy Shannon. Detective Samantha Lang is haunted by the death of her brother and finds herself in over her head. She must abandon everything she knows and loves in order to keep her family safe. Unlawful identity. Loyalty comes with a price, and sometimes it's betrayal. Available on Amazon.com.